I think that's so true for both time and money. It's like we have a finite amount of time, and likely if we're budgeting, we have a finite amount of money, and you want to decide how you're spending that. You're going to make those choices anyways by how you spend it. So the budgeting tool is just bringing awareness to that and making decisions based on that new awareness.
What does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit in that? We tackle those questions and others in the School of Financial Freedom podcast. We talk about the role of money in our personal growth and spiritual liberation, the concrete math of budgeting and saving and investing, and how all this relates to the life you were meant to lead. Each episode is an interview with a former student of my online course, Financial Freedom 1, where they explain their favorite lesson and years later, what financial, behavioral, and spiritual impact it had on them. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of School of Financial Freedom, and your host. Glad you're here. In this episode of the School of Financial Freedom podcast, we talked to Whitney about lesson 310, which is about choosing a budgeting tool. Whitney chose YNAB, You Need a Budget. And what she talks about is how choosing a budgeting tool creates consciousness, which creates choices, which creates freedom. Stay tuned for this special episode.
Hey, this is Whitney, and this is the School of Financial Freedom podcast.
Thanks, Whitney. I'm really excited to have you because you have a special relationship to financial freedom, because even before you took financial freedom, you took the emotional consequences of capitalism. But introduce yourself.
Thanks, Douglas. I agree. Before I get in, I think that foundation, and we can talk about this more, was hugely important to why I wanted to take financial freedom and how FF1 relates to things like the emotional consequences of capitalism. But yeah, I'm Whitney. I'm in my late 30s. I live in Portland with my partner and my dog. My profession is graphic design. I'm a graphic designer. I'm currently a freelancer, which is, I would say, intertwined with my financial freedom story, my personal finance story. But I've also worked in-house, on the studio side, and kind of everywhere in between.
Great. What was the reason you took financial freedom?
That's a great question. Well, I, like you said, took your course, The Emotional Consequences of Capitalism. The cultural influences of capitalism and just generally what influences us as a culture is super interesting to me. And the emotional consequences of capitalism was really, to me, this internal inquiry, this internal questioning. It was really like a philosophy course. And that really, I think, drove me to find ways to implement that practically in my real life, the things that I'd learned. I see FF1, your first course in the School of Financial Freedom, as kind of a half internal philosophical questioning and then half external practical implementation. And so I felt like FF1 was really getting to the heart of both the internal, but also the external and practical implementation of these new ideas I was having around for personal finance, around capitalism, and how I could bring that to life in my day-to-day reality.
It's interesting because you came on today to talk about lesson 3.10, which is the most practical, concrete lesson there is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tell us about why you chose that lesson.
Well, I think I chose it partially because it had such a big impact on me. I really took it to heart. I think I spent a lot of time in the internal space before jumping into this like practical budgeting space. And so there was this really solid foundation of these new opinions I had about capitalism, about how I'm spending my money. And I really was looking for a way to kind of bring that to life. And the budgeting, while super simple and straightforward, it's probably the most simple and straightforward lesson, which doesn't mean it's easy, but it was just the practicality of it. I love the combination of the philosophical work with the kind of logistics of budgeting and how that comes into your real life.
Okay, well, great. Well, why don't you explain lesson 310 and
Sounds good.
to someone who has not done the lesson yet. It's 310, choose a budgeting tool and link your accounts.
Yeah, so like I said, this is a really simple and short lesson, but it's not necessarily, that doesn't mean it's easy. I think your first course, FF1, as I mentioned, is kind of half internal or philosophical work and then half external or practical. And budgeting is, for me, that external or practical work. And that's kind of how I see I'm bringing my values and my opinions and what I've learned into the real world. I think we can talk about things like the hedonic treadmill and what is quote unquote enough for us kind of like all day until we can't talk about it anymore. And that, I think that work's really crucial. But until you bring that into your day-to-day life, it almost doesn't matter, or it seems like it doesn't matter. And I think the day-to-day part, the practical part, actually really does matter. And so if we step back, one of the first things you talk about in the lesson is that most people don't know what they're spending their money on. And I think you have a stat in there, like something like 80% of Americans have no idea how much money they spend on food, clothing, or entertainment. And so one of the key tenets of the course is that the more you spend, the more you need to work. People talk about this as their life energy. So the hours of your life you're exchanging for money, then spend on things, at least for me, really brought that spending into a new light. So it feels, with that in mind, super important to be aware of what you're spending your money on and ultimately what you're spending your time or your life energy on. And this is kind of the heart of what you call defense in personal finance. And so the whole concept of this course is to then bring some awareness to our spending, how we're spending our time, how we're spending our life energy. And this is where the budgeting comes in. And so budgeting is really about tracking where your money is going. So what's coming in and what's going out. And so the step is just really simply about asking you to bring some awareness to that. And something that you say in the course that I really appreciated and took to heart, and I think you were paraphrasing actually one of your other students, was that there's no good or bad, only consequences in spending. And I love that.
She's a nutritionist, but she talks about that in terms of food, and it's just so interesting because it's the same with money.
Totally. And I think these ideas, I think that can be translated to food so well. I think it can also be translated to time. Like, no one can tell you how to spend your time or your money or what you put in your mouth. But if you are bringing awareness to that, you get to decide, if that makes sense. So we're taking kind of the morality out of it, which I think is really helpful, taking any shame out of the spending.
Well, what I love, Whitney, it occurs to me that we're taking out sort of the shame or the emotion and we're replacing it with data. And, you're sort of a data person as well. So talk about having actual data or information changes the way you have awareness.
Totally. So for the budgeting, I keep coming back to this quote that says awareness brings choice and choice brings freedom. And I apply that to my own budgeting a lot. So we're already making decisions about how we're spending our money, whether we're conscious of it or not. So the idea of budgeting is to bring data, to bring awareness to what's really going on. So then we can make decisions about if that's what we want going forward. And I think, if we say we want to do something, like, let's say health is really important to us. And for some people, maybe that manifests in paying for therapy or paying for a personal trainer or gym membership. And we can see that manifest in our budget. And then we can look at that and see if that's really how we're spending our money, if that makes sense. So just really getting some data retroactively, in addition to planning for how we're going to spend the money.
Yeah, I heard it as you should spend extravagantly on the things you care about and ruthlessly cut anything you don't care about.
I love that. And I think that's so true for both time and money. It's like we have a finite amount of time, and likely if we're budgeting, we have a finite amount of money, and you want to decide how you're spending that. You're going to make those choices anyways by how you spend it. So the budgeting tool is just bringing awareness to that and making decisions based on that new awareness.
All right. Well, tell us about the budgeting tool you chose.
Yeah. So in budgeting, you go back to your class, and step one is just simply pick a budgeting tool. I know there are a lot out there. Two of the most popular are YNAB. And YNAB is an acronym that stands for You Need a Budget. Another one is Mint, which I know recently shut down. So that's not much of an option anymore. And I actually wouldn't recommend Mint anyways. So I'll purely talk about YNAB. And before YNAB, I had used Mint. I had used a spreadsheet, but YNAB is kind of like a spreadsheet on steroids. So it's not only a software tool that you can use on your computer and your phone, but it's also a philosophy. And so they have 4 rules that they go by to help you understand this philosophy. And I think in addition to just the budgeting tool itself, being mindful of their quote unquote rules help you think about your money in a slightly different way. So there's 4 rules. The first rule is give every dollar a job. And this is essentially what's called a zero-sum budget, which just means you allocate all of your inflow of money, whether that's towards spending, saving, or debt, so that there's none just sitting around. You can think of YNAB a bit like a digital envelope method, if you've ever heard of that. So the envelope method, pre-internet would be getting any cash come, having that in cash, so not letting it just sit in your bank account, but having that available to you, and then allocating it by category in different physical envelopes for all your expenses. So things like, mortgage or rent, car payments, groceries, health insurance, and then all the incidentals. And so essentially every time you get paid in YNAB, or anytime you get money coming in, doesn't have to be from getting paid, but anytime money is coming into your accounts, you would ask yourself, what do I need this money to do before I get paid again or before I get more money? And then you allocate that money accordingly. And then you just follow your own instructions. So the cool thing is about this is you get to choose. You probably have to pay for your rent or mortgage and you need to eat, but you get to decide how that all breaks down. And obviously, once you start becoming really aware of where your money is going, you might start to make different decisions. So the first step in giving every dollar a job is also listing out all of your expenses. And you can essentially make up as many as you want. And these can be fun things too. They don't have to be just rent and car payments. I have a little category, or if you want to think of it like an envelope, that's just for giving. And this is for things like presents. I have recurring donations that come out of there. So yeah, it can be fun and it can also be the really practical stuff. So that was step 1 or rule 1 of YNAB. So it's give every dollar a job. The second one, which kind of comes from listing out all your expenses, is called embracing your true expenses. And this is really about anticipating large non-monthly expenses and then breaking them down into smaller, usually monthly chunks of money instead. So what you want to do is find your big frequent expenses. For me, this is things like getting my hair cut, which is getting increasingly expensive every year, paying for things like my car's registration, oil changes, a ski pass. Those are all pretty big expenses for me and things that would really throw me off if I wasn't budgeting for them throughout the year, essentially. So what YNAB has you do, and obviously there's lots of little things you can fiddle with in YNAB and adjust, but they would suggest to create essentially a target date for when you'll anticipate needing that money. And then when that expense arrives, you pay it with what you have saved up. So for example, I buy a ski pass every year. It's like for a full ski pass, it's like $900 or something ridiculous. It's absurd. It's so expensive. But this is something that's really important to me that I do with my friends and I do with my partner. So I just save up for it all year. And this comes out to a smaller monthly payment to myself that I kind of stash away. And then when I buy it, the pass around late spring or early summer for the upcoming winter, I just pay it off. And then it's not a big deal. I just have that money waiting for me. And it's still a lot of money, but it's important to me. And so I've saved for it. And I think what's cool about this is for me, every time I get money in and I'm putting money towards my expenses that I've laid out, I can constantly ask myself if this is still an important expense for me. And that might feel like a lot to some people. I think for me, it's a really good exercise in reevaluating constantly what's important, and then letting things change. So I have, some ongoing subscriptions, and every month I'm like, do I want to put this money towards that? Am I using this still? Is this still important to me? And then I can make that call for myself. And that actually kind of leads us into YNAB's third rule, which is roll with the punches. And I love this as a rule for your money, but just for life in general. And the idea here is that there's really no quote unquote normal or typical month. Things are constantly changing. Unexpected things happen in life as in your finances. And so if you don't have money saved up for something that you either decide you want or that comes up, like maybe your car needs an unexpected tune-up or something, you can move money around from a different category that you've been saving up for to cover it. And they emphasize this a lot. And I think this is also part of FF1. Like, there's no shame in that. You don't need to guilt trip yourself for that. It's your money. Spend it how you want. And you just move it around as you need it. So that's really just accepting the uncertainty of life, I would say, and the uncertainty of finances, planning the best you can, and then adjusting as needed when that change or something unexpected comes up. And then the fourth rule of YNAB, they call it aging your money. And I would say really simply, this is just saving your money. Basically, this is just letting there be more time between when you earn money and when you spend it. So again, I would say this is also called saving. And I think this promotes spending less, living within your means, and being more flexible because you have more saved up. And I think having things like a little cushion or things saved up gives you more choice, allows you more time to make decisions in your financial life, which is also just your life. And so I think aging your money is a kind of a fancier, different way to just say saving it and not spending it, spending less. So those are the 4 rules.
Amazing. I'd love to just go a little deeper in each of the rules.
Sounds great.
Yeah. So the first one is every dollar has a job.
Yes.
So talk about how you've done that.
Yeah. So in YNAB, they have what are called categories, which I would imagine those as just these envelopes of where you allocate your money every month. And I have a ton. There are whole Reddit channels dedicated to how people organize their YNAB, and people geek out on this pretty hard. And what's cool is there's no one right way to do it. You just do it how it makes sense for you. So I have many categories. I have probably 70, and those range everywhere from saving for a car and house deductible when things inevitably happen to my car or my house and I need to pay that out, to my mortgage. So I have a whole section on monthly bills. And again, this is like mortgage, cell phone, internet, car insurance, car payment. These are all kind of non-negotiable, in my opinion, things that I need to pay at the very minimum. And then I kind of work away from needs to wants from there in my budget. So then I have subscriptions, I have discretionary spending, which for me are things like eating out, travel, groceries. Obviously, I need groceries, but in my mind, that's not necessarily a fixed amount every month. I can kind of let that ebb and flow. And then I have categories where I save money every month, where I put money towards food for my dog. I save up for her annual vet appointments, her vaccines, dog sitting, emergencies for her. And then I have a whole freelance section where I put money towards my own business and things I need to buy, keep that going. So that's things like software, digital hosting, things like that. And then true expenses, which is one of the YNAB rules, is budgeting for your true expenses. So I kind of lay out everything that's not a monthly bill, but that I know that I'll need to pay for. So things like oil changes, any annual subscriptions I have, let's see, sewer, water, stormwater payments, all that fun stuff. And then I also have a giving category, which is kind of a new one for me. And I think this is a fun example of me looking back at my spending from last year and looking at it retroactively and wanting a specific place where I could kind of spontaneously treat those around me. I mean, that could be anything like a coffee for a friend to kind of a last minute housewarming gift. It's also where I save money for gifts for the holidays, which is something my family does. And also where any reoccurring donations come out for causes that I support.
Okay, so in the next lesson, which is 311, we talk about this concept of pay yourself first, which is actually aligned with a lot of what you're talking about. But the idea of pay yourself first is that you got to protect your savings rate. I'm just curious, is your savings rate in your YNAB, and do you protect it?
Yep, I do. And this is, so I kind of, if you can imagine these categories or envelopes in the software, I start at the top with the non-negotiables. And then as you go down this list of categories that I'm saving, they become more and more negotiable as I go down, so that like visually the most important things are at the top for me. And so my first category, which I didn't mention when I was just talking about, is actually my savings category. And I have within that larger savings kind of bundle, I have money I put away for a Roth, my emergency fund, car deductible, house deductible. Those are kind of my big savings categories, and an emergency fund. So that is my first thing. That is the first category where money goes. And then the next one is my bills, what I was earlier calling my non-negotiables. Like I always have to pay my mortgage no matter what, if I want to have my house. And then as it goes down, yes, I need groceries, like I mentioned, but maybe I don't need as much this month. So yeah, savings is first, and that's accounted for.
Gotcha. So let's go to rule number 2. Give me the name of rule number 2.
It's embrace your true expenses.
Oh, embrace your true expenses. When you talked about it, and you used the example of the ski pass, what I loved about it was, one of the things I always say is personal finance is really your relationship with the future. And so when you talk about how you save up present dollars for future expenditures, it just reminds me, like, it's your present self paying for your future self. It's like a gift to yourself in the future.
Yeah, I love that. I also have a category that's like for my birthday month that I just put a small amount in so that I can, go get a massage or take myself out and do something nice. And I think that's a cool way that YNAB specifically, or any budgeting tool you use, really allows you to make this fun and work towards your values and what's important to you, which is really cool, I think.
Yeah, and it goes to rule number 3, which is roll with the punches. And when you talk about it, the first thing I think about is resilience, right? Like, because I think 80% of Americans could not survive an emergency that cost over $500, right? Like they would crash into debt, right? Because everyone's living on the edge. And so this whole idea of rolling with the punches goes to this, what you talked about earlier, defense. But do you have any thoughts about the resiliency?
I love that you brought up the word resilience because I don't know if I connected that, but yeah, this one feels huge to me. Like I use this all the time. And not only for things like emergencies, but maybe something comes up that I really want to do. And let's say, this could be used in a lot of instances. I just had some unexpected car payments come up that I wasn't expecting, some car just issues, but I had money saved in my car deductible savings category, which isn't like necessarily in my mind for that kind of thing, but it works perfectly in that instance. So I just moved that money over and it didn't put me into any more debt. I had the money already. It felt really easy to just pay that off, and it was. And the money is just waiting there for something like that. I think it's also a cool way to see what's important to you. If you're constantly borrowing money out of a certain category to pay for other things, maybe that category you're borrowing out of isn't that important to you. And that's something for me that I've used. This is kind of superficial, but I used to pay a lot of money to get my hair done, and I still pay, I think, what a lot of people would say is a lot of money, but that's been cut probably in half because I kept borrowing out of that category to pay for other things I actually wanted or needed more in my life. So I just realized, oh, that's actually not that important to me. I'm still going to spend some money on that, but I'm going to spend maybe half of what I would normally spend on it.
There is no good or bad, just consequences, right? Let's go to number 4, aging your money. I think this is super interesting. The idea I love here is that there's a pause between intending to spend your money and spending your money.
Yeah, this one is cool because in YNAB, they actually give you an average date of when your money is coming in versus when you're spending it. And this is kind of an imperfect tool. I don't love this number, but they do say that once you get past 30 days, so essentially once you get past a month, that's where the real kind of freedom kicks in because you have enough saved. You've saved enough for a month of expenses, essentially. And I think if you're shooting for that goal, if you're aiming for this pause, if you're trying to put more time in between when you're getting money and when you're spending it, you're naturally going to start spending less, which I think is just a huge part of what we're trying to do with the tool, or what I'm trying to do. And it just gives you more breathing room in your plans, in your financial life, in your life. And it's because you're spending less, you're probably being more purposeful in that spending as well.
It's interesting because in the lesson, we talk about frictionless spending, which is the idea that capitalism wants less and less time between your desire and your purchase, right? Like one-click spending on Amazon, or being able to be anywhere with your phone and be able to either look at your phone or put your thumbprint on it and buy something immediately. And, one of the tactics that people use for budgeting is you're not allowed to buy anything until you wait for a week, right? Like if you want this thing on Amazon, you actually just have to wait a week and see how you feel a week later.
Yeah. And a lot of people who use YNAB, and that I read about people using YNAB before I started using it, I would hear people describe it as, oh, I wanted this thing, so I went and looked at my YNAB to see if I had the money for it. And even that pause, even though you can, It's your money. You can move money around. That's what roll with the punches is. If you decide you want to move money around, even if you don't have it allocated for this thing, there is that pause and there are consequences. And again, there's like no shame meant to be attributed to any of that spending specifically. It's your money. You spend it how you want. That is something I love about the idea of budgeting. It's not meant to be a tool to impose guilt on yourself. It's a neutral tool, but there are consequences and that money has to come from somewhere. Like we said, it's likely you have a finite amount of money. And so it's coming from somewhere. And so you do have to pause to think about, is that something you want? Is that the kind of trade-off you want?
It occurs to me that a lot of what you can do with YNAB is essentially values-based spending, as opposed to be unconscious about how you're spending. Actually be conscious of, like, are you spending in the ways that you want, aligned with what you want your life to be like?
Exactly. I think that's what's so cool about it. And that was kind of what I was talking about earlier, is after reflecting on how my finances looked from last year, YNAB has, in addition to your budgeting tool, they actually have a lot of cool reporting tools. And these are like bars and charts that break up how you're spending your money with percentages and real numbers. And even though I do monthly donations to causes I care about, I didn't have that separated in a way that I was able to see it really easily. So that prompted me to think about just like even a giving category, and it, not a lot of money, but enough where I feel like these are things that are important to me. And I want a whole category based on that, because I want to be able to, treat my friends to a coffee or buy dinner for someone in my family, and to have that money set aside for things like that. So it doesn't feel like a burden and I can do it. And that is a value of mine that I want to come out through my finances.
Yeah. So, I love how YNAB, there's this temporal aspect of it, right? Like, it is present Whitney choosing how future Whitney is going to consume. Like, one of the things I always think about is there's no such thing as not spending. It's a question of when, right? Like, is it in the present, or like when you take on debt, it's you're telling your future self to buy something for your present self. And sometimes it's good, like for a house. What YNAB does is actually creates more of a future orientation. You're creating ways that future Whitney will get to consume. So one of the things that keeps on coming up as I listen to you is what you said earlier, which is awareness brings choice and choice brings freedom. And, the course is called Financial Freedom. The sense of, you talk about there's a practical side, but the internal philosophical side is that financial independence starts with liberating your mind. And this brings up something else you were doing while you took Financial Freedom, which is you did a yoga teacher training, which is a lot about awareness. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think both yoga and personal finance for me have been so centered around this idea of awareness, and that you're going to be making decisions anyways, like I've said a lot earlier, around your finances. But I'm hoping to be more aware of those decisions I'm making. Just like in my day-to-day life, for me, yoga has been about being aware of my body, how my body feels, the emotions that come up through my body, how that affects my reactions and my relationships, and becoming more aware and more attuned to those things that come up and to the changes that happen throughout the day, I think puts more space and more choice in your life as well. So like really similar to how we were talking about the fourth rule and increasing this time between when you're getting money in and when it's leaving your account through spending. I think for me, yoga has really been about similarly awareness, but attuning to what's happening internally so that I have this space and this pause of how to act or react in my life externally, and just being mindful of that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it reminds me of Viktor Frankl, the quote, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Yeah, having the choice is our growth and our freedom. And one of the things I know talk about in yoga is awareness of our conditioning, because we have automatic responses to stimuli.
Yeah. And I think that's a lifetime task. And I think we would all benefit from just being even slightly more aware of that. There's so much conditioning from our culture, from where we grew up, from how we grew up. And, you and I have talked about this a lot, but just questioning that, being aware of that, I think is just so helpful. And yeah, I'm constantly in that questioning. And I think the personal finance part of that is just such a cool outpouring of that into a part of life that I think is normally thought of as really mathematical and maybe cold and dry and maybe boring, but feels like this really natural extension of this idea of awareness and putting that space or increasing that pause between these internal stimuli that are happening and how we're letting that affect us externally in how we react, in how we live our lives, in how we spend, and in our habits.
Yeah. Talk about bravery, Whitney, because, and I'll preface this a little bit. Like, one of the things that comes up is one of my spiritual mentors talks about addiction, how addiction is absence of choice. Like, habitual responses, and the habitual responses are unconscious. And the recovery from addiction, and there's all sorts of capitalism analogies here. Recovery from addiction is the willingness to look at your unconscious choices and make different choices. And so when I think about you looking at YNAB like monthly, it seems like it takes a certain amount of bravery, because most people do not want to know what they're spending.
That's a really cool way to think of it. Yeah, I think that my whole goal is to really look down my choices and just decide if they're aligned with how I want to live my life. And that's, I'm not, obviously those things take form over days and weeks and months and years. And I've been in a lot of unaligned choices, and I'm sure I will be. But I think the practice is, which is kind of similar to meditation, it's just like starting over again and again and just being okay with that, both the uncertainty of where these choices will lead you, but also being okay with just making a choice, seeing if it's right, adjusting again and again and again, and not being scared of that, of you changing your mind. I think that's something that's been helpful for me, is to just try to be brave in making choices and then letting myself change my mind after that, instead of getting paralyzed by trying to make the quote unquote right choice and just kind of moving forward, because life's going to move forward anyways. So we're just trying to make choices that feel aligned in the moment and then letting ourselves adjust.
Yeah, yoga is always right there in the moment, right? Like at the breath. Is there any paradox for you between that and the future orientation of personal finance?
Oh, that's such a cool question. That's such a great question. I think I like to think that I'm going to be here in the future, so I want to plan for that, but I also know that there's no guarantees. So I think it's, for me, a balancing act of imagining my best, brightest, most aligned future and taking steps to hopefully make that possible. And then also living in the present and making choices for that as well. So I think it's a both. It's a both and. I don't see them being opposed necessarily, but using them to work together, if that makes sense.
To me, it aligns with what Quakers believe, which is there's no such thing as ownership, it's stewardship, right? And what you're talking about is at some point, future Whitney is going to need income. And, the way our lifespans go, there's a certain money earning period of our lives, and it's not going to last forever. So we're stewarding money for our future selves, which I think YNAB is really helping you with. One of the other things that you were really interested in was talking about what is enough and the hedonic treadmill. Any thoughts about that and YNAB?
Oh, I mean, it's all so connected for me. I kind of feel like you can't take them apart. And I think that's what's so great about FF1 in general is that it doesn't silo this internal exploration and questioning and the philosophical work we're doing with how that relates practically and logistically to your day-to-day life. I don't think either work on their own, like we talked about earlier, you can wax poetic about, being anti-capitalist or whatever, what's enough all day. But until you implement that into your life, I don't think it actually matters. And also, if you just are budgeting without any sense of what's important to you, I mean, I think budgeting inevitably makes it clear what's important to you. But if you're not putting any thought into that, and are maybe just tracking retroactively, for example, I don't think that's really getting to the core of it either. Yeah, I think they're kind of inseparable. I love the quote. I think you brought this up at some point in the course, but the idea of not wanting something is as good as having it. I think about that all the time.
Yeah, that's Mr. Money Mustache. He says, not wanting a $400,000 sailboat is the same thing as wanting it and buying it. Like it puts you in the exact same emotional boat. But it's easy to see, because I don't want a $400,000 boat, but it becomes much harder to practice when it's actually something I do want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that questioning is just part of the process, right? Like I live in the world and I want things and I haven't rid myself of wanting things, but I think I'm slightly more attuned to that want. And maybe, and we talk about this in your course as well, like what want is that, or let me say it a different way, like what need is that desire for the boat filling? And that's something I also think about a lot. Is this really a desire for belonging or acceptance or, that kind of thing, that line of questioning? I think that's just valuable in and of itself. If you end up buying the boat, you end up buying the boat, but hopefully you've also been thinking about where that's coming from.
It's so funny. I have some good friends who are actually they're, I think, 2 years away from financial freedom, from crossing over. And they just bought a boat because they want to live on a boat after crossing over. But the joke, I hear it's a common joke in the sailing world, is a boat is just a hole that in the water that you throw money into.
I love that.
Well, so what year did you take financial freedom?
I think I took it in 2021, I think.
That's right. Yeah. So, now we're 2024. So 2.5 years later, what's changed for you since, gaining more control over your budgeting and your financial life?
Yeah. Well, I mean, externally, maybe it wouldn't appear as a lot has changed, but I feel like internally a lot has changed. I feel a lot more aligned with how I'm using my money, which in turn gives me a lot of, this probably sounds cheesy, but just like peace, and not feeling like I'm spending on things that aren't important to me. I'm not sure if this is totally related, but I think since taking the course, I think going freelance, I started freelancing almost a year ago. And so I think having this awareness around my money after taking the course, through the budgeting and just my own values around it gave me the confidence to go freelance. That was like a much bigger, more complicated decision, but knowing that I had this structure in place, my budgeting tools and my awareness around it made me feel really confident. Not that it was an easy decision, but it made me feel more confident making that decision, which has been a really great choice for me and has opened up so many new and exciting pathways in my career. And I'm not sure I would have done that or I might have taken a lot longer to do it and might not be doing it so successfully without the tools I've learned in the class. Yeah, it just has given me a sense of the really practical side of what I need to make to hit my, what my needs are, my bills every month, and where that can grow and where that can shrink. Having that awareness has made it a lot easier to cope with the uncertainty of being freelance, which is still hard to cope with, but this is just one tool that has made it so much easier.
Yeah, I get the sense that you have more confidence, not only in your money, but because you have more confidence in your money, you actually have more confidence in your control over the choices in your life.
Yeah, definitely. And they feel like they're coming from an informed place and a place where, kind of like I said, I'm making, I would say, decisions quicker and then adjusting quicker also. So kind of not getting so paralyzed because I do have this awareness. And I know, like you said, I have a little more resilience. I feel like I can change course faster and I have more confidence to know that I can do that and that I can trust myself to make these decisions going forward.
Yeah, when you mentioned peace, having a greater sense of peace with both your money and your life, it occurs to me that peace is a Quaker testimony, but integrity is too. And I think about integrity not only in terms of truth, and through YNAB, you've been able to see the truth of yourself and your spending and what's important to you. But integrity also means a sense of wholeness. And I get a sense that you've been able to make choices that feel more aligned and whole to who you are.
100%. Yeah, I think that's been a huge, I'm glad you dug into that a little bit because that's been a huge part, I think, of the financial aspect of being able to go freelance for me. I have been able to both decenter work in my life by working fewer hours, but also focus on work that's actually just more joyful, more rewarding, and with people that feel really aligned. And so not only does the work feel more meaningful in and of itself, but I'm also working a little less than I have in the past. And that has opened up just time and energy to do other things that are interesting to me that are totally outside and unrelated to the work I do for money. And so having the tools like budgeting and all this internal questioning of how I want to spend my money has made it really clear to me how much I need to work every month to pay my bills, essentially, and making decisions based on that instead of either fear or uncertainty or not knowing at all how much I needed, which I've been there and done that too for most of my life. So having that knowledge for me has just given me so many more options about how I'm able to spend my time. And that has felt so aligned. I really like what I do for work. And I also have a ton of interests outside of work. And when I'm working all the time, there isn't the time or energy to do that. And making time for that and giving myself the space to do the things I love outside of work has just opened up even more energy to do the work I love. It's just it's a cycle of like increasing energy and joy and time that just seems to like feed itself.
Wow. Well, I was going to ask you to make a pitch for people to take Financial Freedom 1, but that's a pretty good pitch. Do you have anything else to add to the pitch?
Oh gosh, it was just such a joy to go through, and it's so different from any other kind of financial education I've done. I think you can't talk about money without talking about things like capitalism and the gender pay gap and hedonic treadmill, but a lot of financial education avoids that or doesn't talk about it. And so that, I think, is why this is such a special course, and the people it attracts are equally special and smart and resourceful and bring so much to the class as well, outside of just the content itself.
Yeah, it's the people that make me want to keep on teaching it because I love the people I meet in it. Last question. what are your learning edges now with your personal finance or your financial freedom?
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit. I think I have the like quote unquote defense or like budgeting pretty down. It's the offense that I'm still working on. So like the income side, and I'm still working on that a lot. I think I've found this really great place where I'm able to cut my expenses a lot, but still do the things that I want to do. I don't feel like I'm depriving myself, but I've kind of cut the fat, so to speak. And that's been really successful for me. I haven't spent as much time on the offense side. And so I'm still interested in that. Right now, I'm moving old 401ks over and working on investing that money. So it's there, but it feels a little less confident. And I feel like there's more to explore there.
Yeah, I mean, those are all FF2 topics, like learning how to earn more money and how to invest. I mean, the thing is, I've been teaching financial freedom for 7 years, and I'm still learning, right? Because learning about money is really just learning about your own awareness and consciousness in the world. So, any last words, Whitney?
Nothing. Just thank you for the chance to talk about this. This feels so nerdy and fun and enjoyable, and I just really appreciate the conversation.
Well, thank you. You've been listening to the School of Financial Freedom podcast. This was lesson 310, which was about budgeting and linking your accounts so that you actually know what you're spending. We'll be back with another lesson. I think 310 is about actually understanding the budgeting of needs, wants, and bullshit, which Whitney mentioned briefly. But thank you for listening, and we'll hear from you again, or you'll hear from us again. Thank you for tuning in to the School of Financial Freedom podcast, where we ask, what does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit into that? We hope you enjoyed this episode and it helps you live with an increasing sense of empowerment, integrity, and agency in the world. For more information, resources, and to re-listen to this or any past episodes, visit our website at schoolofinancialfreedom.com. There you can find out when the next cohort of Financial Freedom 1, the online course is. If you've enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a review, as it helps more people find us and join our community of people interested in the intersection of money and personal and spiritual growth. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of the School of Financial Freedom. You can also find me on Substack, where you can subscribe to my popular newsletter, Money and Meaning. I also love hearing from readers and listeners, so write me at www.douglassoy.com. I'm grateful that you listened, and I hope that this episode has given you hope and insight into taking control of your finances to live the life you want.